welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Hello, Rose.
Hello, Christine.
So lovely to see you. You are looking quite radiant these days.
Well, that's nice to hear. I was going to say you actually look tan.
I did a lot of canoeing this summer, so that might explain it. Here it is. It's October when we're recording this, and it'll be a few weeks before we put it out. But our topic today, which has been touched on before, and it's one of my favorite topics these days. So guess what? We're talking about it again. What is the link between climate change and consciousness? What do you think?
Well, I do think that the solution to where we're at this point has to do with raising our consciousness. Is that a good answer? I do think that right now, well, coming off of September, I did a lot of episodes about climate grief because it occurs to me as an empath. It's what I'm feeling. A lot of fear that is mine, but feels like it's bigger than mine, right? Feels like it's a collective fear. Really knowing where we're going, and the fact that it's undeniable and that we've caused it, I think is presenting us with this. We're really in our heads about it. We're really thinking about it. It enters our subconscious. I wake up in the morning and really have to go out and ground to get out of my head. So I think the best thing that we can all do is try to get out of our head and into our heart space and raise our vibration. Get out of that fear and get into hope. Or I was looking at the map of consciousness in the Power versus Force book. I know we'd had a conversation about this before. And it seems like fear is pretty low on the scale of consciousness. It's like at a 100. If we could get to even 200, which is courage, the courage to take steps forward, the courage to step forward and make change, or the courage to face what we've wrought on ourselves, the courage to take action, then if we can shift it, it feels like that may be part of our solution.
Mm-hmm. And so I just want to remind our listeners that your reference to the map of consciousness is work by Dr. David Hawkins, who is an American psychiatrist, and he has done something which is out there all over the place. If you just Google map of consciousness, you'll get this map, which shows. He postulated, and he did a lot of research over his decades. He's passed away a couple of years ago, but to sort of back up the idea, which is connected to quantum physics and the Heisenberg principle, which he likes to say, which is the fact that the act of observing something, the act of consciousness changes the outcome, right? Mm-hmm. And so the map of consciousness, he says, between 0 and 200 is the realm of force, which is not real power, but it is where much of the world's population and our societies are usually sitting at. And once you get to 200, which, like you mentioned, Rose, is courage, and above, that's where you start stepping into actual power. That's why he's got a book called Power versus Force. I actually would recommend The Map of Consciousness Explained, which was written or published after he passed away. And it pulls from his work, but it's easier. I find it's more accessible than Power versus Force. So, listeners can decide.
So who wrote that book? Somebody took his work and explained it better?
So it's his wife.
Okay.
And somebody who worked with him, who's I think, PhD psychologist or maybe psychiatrist. I don't want to get it wrong. And they worked with him, and they basically said, this is his work, these are his words, but they just pulled it together in a way that I find more accessible.
Oh, that's interesting, because I have a friend who was recommended the book Power versus Force was recommended to her, and she just felt it was like too esoteric. She couldn't really get into it. But I will recommend that.
Yes, The Map of Consciousness Explained.
Okay, all right, that sounds good.
Yes, but I don't want to get too deep into that, because we could talk about that for hours. But the idea that we're not in real power until we're at courage. And I would say that actually most people who become climate activists who have been able to touch that level of 200, or they would still be in apathy, they would still be in fear, they would still be in grief. It doesn't mean that that's where you are always at. And I have to confess, because I muscle test, which is what Dr. Hawkins did. And I checked to see, and you are definitely at 200 or above, Rose, and you wouldn't be doing this work if you weren't. So you touch the grief, and you touch the anger is actually higher than both grief and fear, but it's still not at 200, it's at 150. So you can see why anger might be a higher level of consciousness, because it can move one into action. But if you're moved into action only by anger, you will not be acting with the force that you could be if you're at the level of courage, and then acting from courage, still with some anger. But I do want to tell people, and again, this is in The Map of Consciousness Explained, which I've been reading recently. And what I found super helpful for him was for him to talk about how evolutionarily, so we're, looking over the millennia, obviously, that love is a fairly recent development. You look at reptiles and coming out of the swamp, and, even those animals now, they lay their eggs and they walk away, right? And he says love came about, sort of was introduced in birds and mammals because of the mother-child relationship. So it shows you how powerful that is, right? That is the spark of caring in this world. And he also said, it is helpful to know, and I'm reading now, that to care about others, much less the environment or the quality of life on our planet, is extremely recent in the evolution of consciousness over millennia. So while it's frustrating for those of us who are sitting here and going, well, obviously it affects us when the ocean is polluted, when our air is polluted, when we're destroying the climate for future generations. If you go, wow, but I guess the realization that is a very recent development, and you have to realize that not everybody is there, and that in fact, you and me and the listeners who care about climate change are really at the forefront. And we actually have to have some patience with the people who are at the lower level of consciousness, who are just surviving. That really is what it has been about on this planet, right? Survival. And for a
Well,
lot
and if you look at the 8 billion people that are on the planet, there's very few of us that live beyond the survival mode.
exactly. And it still is. And the words of the Dalai Lama were coming to me as I was thinking about this recently, because he says Western women, that quote, are going to save the planet because we have the luxury of
We have the privilege of being able to think about more than just what we're providing.
Exactly.
Maslow's hierarchy.
Exactly. Yes, that's a really good way of putting it. If people can understand, because Maslow's hierarchy has kind of been out there too, and it's not for a long time, and it's not quite as esoteric as the map of consciousness, but you can't attend to the things further up on the hierarchy unless you feel safe and you have your needs for home and shelter and food met. So those of us who do, like you and me, and those of our listeners who are able to have a little bit of space or spaciousness in their time and their consciousness to do this work. Just know that not everybody does. And it also, when we do this work and get to 200 or above, we impact way more than just the people around us. We, again, Hawkins has the numbers, but one person over 200 is like makes up for however many thousands of people who are still under 200. So it's so easy. And in climate change, I mean, it's so easy to point fingers and see what isn't being done. And I don't think either you or I would ever say we shouldn't act. Of course we act, but if we act from that consciousness that when we are in power, when we're at 200 or above, not stuck in fear or anger or grief, which we will touch. We have to. This is a situation that brings up all of that for us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all very interesting when you're talking about love. So I've mentioned this before. In September, we were doing a lot of conversation about grief, and as an empath, I feel that grief. Of course, some of it's my own, but some of it I do believe is the collective. When I can get out of my head and into my heart, and that was kind of a knowing that I got this morning in meditation, was I wake up anxious, and I think I'm being pummeled by all the energies, the negative energies overnight, because I'm open. And then when I wake up, I'm feeling it, and I have to like calm my nervous system before I can get on with my day. The knowing came this morning that just get out of your head, get into your heart, approach the day with love, and stay in that curiosity and step into the mystery of what today can bring. Instead of living backwards, you're living forwards. You're living into the possibility as opposed to living by what's already transpired. And as human beings, I mean, everything we do is based on experience, but that's very left brain. If we can step into the right brain, into our intuitive self, and live in our heart space, then being courageous and being accepting and having compassion for people who aren't living in our vibration, all of that becomes easier.
You must have been like downloading David Hawkins overnight because I have a quote from him. The only way to enhance one's power in the world is by increasing one's own integrity, understanding, and capacity for compassion. And again, and I don't know if I have the quote there or not, but basically just like you said, stepping into the sacredness of life and appreciating it, everything we have, even in the midst of a climate emergency. And that actually, if we get back to the map of consciousness, appreciation for what we have, the presence of love and compassion, even though it's not quite enough yet to shift us out of the climate emergency, this very appreciation has the effect of increasing it, the love and compassion. And so it really, and it sounds very esoteric, but I feel like Hawkins has done a lot of work, and there's a strong foundation to what he's done. And we also have quantum physics, which tells us that just the very fact of observing something changes it. We know our consciousness is powerful. We don't really know it yet, but we're becoming aware of how powerful it is.
Yeah. And not to get all conspiracy theorists on us, but I do have to put this in there.
Throw it out there. There's always room for conspiracy on this.
It's for the powers that be, for the 1%, for the people for the elite, for the people that run the world, captains of industry and so-called political leaders, or political so-called leaders. It's not to their benefit for us to operate at a higher frequency.
I agree.
Because if we're in fear of, the biggest fear is, poverty mentality. And I'm not enough. I don't have enough. The pie's not big enough. If they keep us in struggle, then they're in control. Once we realize the power that each of us has as a spirit living a human existence, once we know our divinity, then we're much less easy to control.
Yeah. And that is an evolutionary step. And here we are. I mean, on a personal level, if somebody's addicted to a substance, it usually takes a hitting rock bottom, right? Real kind of giving up almost, and letting go. And here we are as humanity, where we are in a crisis, and it's a spiritual and consciousness crisis, as well as a climate and biodiversity crisis. And so is it possible for us to release the ego, which again, the ego is not evil. It's gotten us to where we are. If we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about the struggle between power and force. We wouldn't even be here. That's what's gotten us here. And so it's really neutral. And in fact, it's been positive, but now we have to step beyond that. And that really is our challenge. And the wonderful thing, the thing I love about Map of Consciousness work, which is what I've been immersing myself in much of the time these days, is that it is empowering. Our consciousness can change the world.
Agreed.
More than just our own life. And even if some people may not be that comfortable with the word divinity, which you used, but Hawkins sort of addresses that. And he talks about, you can be an atheist, but if you understand that, I've got a quote here, the individual mind is like a computer connected to a giant database. And that database is human consciousness itself. It's everything that's ever happened. We're connected to that. You can think of it as the universe and divinity, which maybe you and I are comfortable with. You can also think
I call it source sometimes too,
Yeah.
just because it's, I like that image of a giant computer that all of this information is available.
Yes.
You just need to, one, acknowledge that you are part of that giant consciousness, and then practice tapping into it and asking for the information that you want and being open to receiving that information. So it's very intuitive based, but I get that we're kind of taught, our paradigm exists and teaches us that if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. But quantum physics is connecting with spirituality at this point and saying that just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. It is there. Once you experience it, if you get hits of intuition all the time, if you actually follow those hits, it's amazing how powerful they are. And the more, I'm getting goosebumps right now as I'm saying this, because the more I follow my intuition, the more magical my life is. And I know I'm nothing special. Everybody has that same ability. It's awakening to it. And it's not something that we're going to be taught because it doesn't serve the purposes of the capitalist regime, of, whatever the driving forces are to make money and control.
Patriarchy.
Yeah, it doesn't serve them to say, to tell you when you're 5 years old, just follow your intuition. You're being led all the time. So you get to be like me, and you wake up in your 50s and you go, this isn't working for me. What's going on? And then, like you said, you fall into the dark night of the soul. And then you wake up and you go, wow, there's another way.
Yeah.
And I think, so I think we're at this almost tipping point evolutionarily. Is that the word? That was a lot of syllables. That more and more people are waking up to the fact that we are much more powerful than we know. There's more than there's more going on than we can actually see.
See, hear, feel, like it's those five senses. Yeah.
Right.
There's stuff beyond our five senses.
There is stuff beyond our five senses. And when you trust that, and that's one of the things on the map of consciousness, when you get to neutrality, when you just give it up and you just trust, it's kind of like you're just floating in the river, and now you let the river take you, as opposed to flowing, pushing against or flowing with.
Trying to make things happen.
Yeah.
And that's hard in a climate crisis when you feel like nobody's doing enough. And we aren't. We're not saying that we're doing enough. We're saying this is a consciousness shift. This is an evolutionary moment. And wow, we are in the middle of it. And what I'm thinking is that we are going to carry on this conversation. And next time, let's talk about strong and weak attractors.
Ooh.
Yeah. But I think probably our listeners are going, I think I have to digest what those two have just said. We don't want to.
And I could talk about this. I could talk about this stuff all day long. It fascinates me.
It fascinates me too. And it is the way forward, at least for me. We can't, the idea that we're powerful when we step into courage, but also, like you said, it's not giving up. What is that? The one that's in the middle?
Surrender.
Surrender. Thank you. That's so different than giving up, isn't it? Because we're not giving up. We're surrendering to this idea that life is living out through us, and we're all connected to it. And
well, the belief that life is happening for us.
Yeah.
What if that changes everything. If everything that happens in your life is to teach you something, and you learn a lesson from it and move forward, as opposed to getting stuck in the woe is me. Why is this, why is this happening? I mean, we all see patterns repeat in our lives. Patterns repeat because we haven't learned the lesson yet. That's my belief system.
Yeah.
But once you go, oh, there it is again. It shows up
then,
everywhere.
And then it'll probably pop up again. But when you're conscious of it, you can go, oh, I can choose a different way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is my action tip for this week. Again, based on map of consciousness work, Hawkins said, if you want to cultivate a higher level of consciousness, let the person in front of you in traffic, just let the person who's butting in front of you in traffic, let them do that and bless them. You don't have to bless them. He doesn't. That was my little addition. But everyday success practice in traffic, always let others cut in front of you. That's
okay. I'm going to have to mention that to James, because he does that. It makes me absolutely crazy.
Yes, he lets people. He lets people. There you go. And Hawkins said within that practice is hidden the hidden secret power of becoming a successful person, because you will become a truly courteous person. And we can talk about what that means in this context. But there you go.
Okay.
There he is, already halfway there, or maybe all the way there. Yes. So always let others cut in front of you. It's funny because I was reading this recently, and we haven't been driving that much, but we were out yesterday, and I'm like, I think we all need to work on this, folks, because people are not always happy when that happens. So that's an action tip. I'm very curious to hear what people say. And about the good news, there's interesting stuff happening there. Rivian, the electric truck company, just put out a public offering last Friday. So that will be interesting. They kind of are positioning themselves as sort of the Apple or the Tesla of the truck business. So we'll see.
Well, that's interesting, because Ford, which is the Ford 150, 250, 350. I mean, that's the big truck here in the States. And they're really going after the EV market too. So
yeah, the Ford 150 is the best selling vehicle of all time. And they've made an amazing electric version of it, which isn't available yet, is it? But is it coming out in 2022?
I think it's 2022. Unfortunately, it's not priced for the average person though. And so that's another, I think it's like $70,000. So EVs need to come down in price, but I think more and more people are looking towards them.
Yeah. No, they'll get the higher end of the market, but just the fact that the Ford 150, which is this iconic vehicle, is going to be electric, and it's pretty amazing. And Rivian is out there, so that's going to be our good news for this week. That, and the fact that our consciousness is part of addressing climate change. Mm-hmm. We are part of what the world is becoming.
Absolutely.
Nice to chat, Rose.
Good to see you again. That's this week's Friday episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and